Imagine a commander who cannot even stand on his own 2 feet, yet makes entire kingdoms tremble at the mere mention of his name. A man whose cruelty was not just a tool for intimidation, but a sophisticated art form. In this video, we will dive into the darkest chapter of British history, when the shores were hit not just by a band of robbers, but by the Great Heathen Army, a force capable of grinding civilization into dust. You will learn why the legendary Blood Eagle execution is not just a myth from horror movies, and how the Vikings turned war into the first transnational corporation where the currency was living people. We will tell you how a sickly teenage bookworm, on whom no one placed their bets, managed to outplay the brilliant psychopath Ivar the Boneless, and why victory sometimes requires becoming an even greater monster than your enemy. Forget the romance of knightly tournaments. Here, kings are turned into pincushions for arrows. Water is replaced by one's own urine, and betrayal becomes the only way to survive. Watch this video to the end to find out how, from dirt, treachery, and mountains of corpses, a nation was born that would one day conquer half the world. This is a story not about heroes, but about survival at any cost. Imagine you are standing on the coast of East Anglia. The cold wind from the North Sea chills you to the bone, making your eyes water. But you are not crying from the wind. You look at the horizon and your heart skips a beat, then another. Where there should be gray waves and seagulls, you see a forest of masts. Black, tarred sails block out the sky like clouds of locusts coming to devour your harvest, your children, your future. These are not the petty bands of raiders you have gotten used to over the last decades. These are not 3 longships that land, burn a church and run away with silver chalices, while the local thane rubs the sleep from his eyes. Number. In that year, 865 AD, the history of Britain snapped like a dry twig. It wasn't a gang that came to the island's shores. It was a nation. They called it the Great Heathen Army. But the word army is too civilized. It was a migration of predators. Thousands of warriors, hundreds of ships, women, children, blacksmiths, and whores. They didn't come for gold. Gold can be stolen and sailed away with. They came for land. For your land. At the head of this force stood a man whose very existence was a mockery of nature. Ivar the Boneless. The sagas say different things about him. Some claim he had no bones in his legs and moved by crawling like a snake. Others say he was carried on a shield, like a living idol of war. But let's cast aside mysticism and look at the facts. In a world where respect is earned by muscle power and the weight of an axe, a cripple became the leader of the Vikings. Think about that for a second. What monstrous intellect, what bestial charisma must one possess to make thousands of healthy, blood-drunk killers obey a man who cannot stand in formation? Ivar was not a warrior in the usual sense. He was a strategist. While Anglo-Saxon kings were playing at chivalry, Ivar was playing chess. Only the pieces were living people, and the board was the entire island. Now let's transport ourselves south, to the kingdom of Wessex. Who is supposed to stop this demon? Who is this hero in shining armor? Look at him, the 5th son of King Aethelwulf. The 5th. He is so far down the line of succession that he isn't even considered a backup option. His name is Alfred. He is about 16 years old. He is pale, plagued by constant stomach pains, likely Crohn's disease, which will torment him his whole life. He loves books more than the sword. He dreams of a pilgrimage to Rome, not a brawl in the mud. If you were a bookie in the year 865, who would you bet on? On the brilliant psychopath Ivar, backed by thousands of cutthroats? Or on a sick teenage bookworm who isn't even king? The answer is obvious. Alfred was a statistical error. He shouldn't have survived, let alone won. But history has a twisted sense of humor. Ivar's first victim was Northumbria, a kingdom in the north, torn apart by civil war. Two contenders for the throne, Osbert and Aella, were so busy slaughtering each other that they noticed the Vikings only when they were already breaking down the gates of York. Ivar used their stupidity as a weapon. He simply waited. And when the Saxons realized what was happening, it was too late. Northumbria fell. The ancient walls of York, which still remembered Roman legionaries, were now decorated with Anglo-Saxon heads. Legends say that it was here that Ivar demonstrated his understanding of terror. King Aella, the very one who, according to legend, killed Ivar's father, Ragnar Lothbrok, was subjected to an execution known as the Blood Eagle. We won't go into anatomical details. We'll leave that for horror movies. What matters is this. Whether it is truth or myth, the rumor of it spread across Britain faster than the plague. Ribs turned outward like wings, lungs breathing their last air. It was a message. We don't just kill. We turn death into art. Fear became Ivar's main weapon. Then came the turn of East Anglia. King Edmund decided he would not bow his head to pagans. He took to the field. A hero? Undoubtedly. A fool? Possibly. The great army crumpled his retinue like paper. Edmund was taken prisoner. And here we see Ivar's handwriting again. He didn't just need a dead king. He needed an example. The chronicler, Abbo of Fleury, describes the scene as if he were standing there himself, trembling with horror. Edmund was tied to a tree. Ivar didn't order his head cut off immediately. No, that would have been too simple. The Vikings began shooting arrows at him. Arrow after arrow. Into his arms, legs, shoulders. They weren't killing him. They were making a pincushion out of him. The chronicle says, until he looked like a hedgehog, bristling with quills. Imagine the scene. The laughter of Vikings, the whistle of arrows, and the prayers of a king refusing to renounce his faith. Ivar watched this with the cold curiosity of a vivisectionist. He was testing the limits of the human spirit. In the end, Edmund was beheaded, and, according to legend, his head was thrown into the bushes. The church got a martyr. England got a lesson. Resistance leads not just to death, but to agony. By the year 870, the map of Britain was flooded with red. Northumbria destroyed. East Anglia destroyed. Mercia, once a powerful kingdom, was buying them off with silver, trembling with fear. Only Wessex remained, the last island of civilization at the edge of the world. Ivar the Boneless, sitting on a throne in York, looked south. His scouts reported that a young King Aethelred and his sickly brother Alfred ruled there. To Ivar, they were nothing more than dessert after the main course, sheep waiting for the slaughter. He didn't know that this sheep read treatises on Roman military tactics. He didn't know that a cornered beast bites the hardest. The Viking army moved on Reading, thousands of axes thirsting for final blood. It seemed the outcome was foregone. God had abandoned the Anglo-Saxons. But at that moment, when the darkness had thickened to its maximum, a factor came into play that Ivar, for all his genius, could not calculate. The factor of human will multiplied by desperation. Alfred closed his books and picked up a sword. The sword was heavy, unfamiliar, but there was nowhere to retreat. Behind them was the sea. Ahead was a shield wall and a smiling devil on a litter. The war entered a new phase. It was no longer a slaughter of innocents. The power vacuum that had spread like a plague across the islands after the death of ancient dynasties demanded to be filled. And if Ivar thought victory was already in his pocket, he made his first and main mistake. He underestimated the power of the weak. The year 871 entered the chronicles not in ink, but in soot. Historians would call it the Year of Battles. 9 major battles in 12 months. 9 times the soil of Wessex was ground into a bloody mess. But for the people standing on the wind-swept hills of Berkshire that January morning, it wasn't history. It was the end of the world. The air rang with frost. Fog crept along the lowlands, hiding the fear in the eyes of the militia.
The situation was ridiculously classic, as if from a tactics textbook that none of those present had read.
The Vikings took the high ground, the perfect position. Ashdown Ridge towered over the field, and on its summit stood a shield wall, bright, painted circles of wood and iron, behind which waited professional killers. They looked down on the Saxons like wolves looking at a herd that had brought itself to the slaughter. Attacking them from below uphill is suicide. Any veteran will tell you. Whoever stands higher wins. Gravity is on the side of the Vikings. But the main problem for the Saxons wasn't geography. It was in the king's tent. King Ethelred, Alfred's older brother, was praying. A priest mumbled Latin, performing mass. Messengers burst into the tent, one after another. "My lord, the pagans are forming up!" "My lord, they are about to strike!" The king's answer was worthy of a saint, but disastrous for a commander. He would not leave the service until it was finished. He would not place the earthly above the heavenly. Put yourself in Alfred's shoes. You are 22 years old. You are a prince, but not the king. You see the Vikings on the hill starting to beat their weapons against their shields, that rhythmic, maddening thunder that chills the blood. And your commander-in-chief is busy saving his soul while the army prepares to lose their bodies. Every minute of delay brought catastrophe closer. The Vikings could break into a charge down the slope at any moment, and then an avalanche of steel would simply sweep the Saxons away. At that moment, something snapped in Alfred, or, conversely, fell into place. The bookworm vanished. The beast remained. The chronicler Asa, who knew the king personally, writes, "He acted like a wild boar." Forget the image of the pious youth from icons. A boar is rage, foam at the mouth, a ramming blow that ignores pain. Alfred didn't wait for his brother. He didn't wait for an order. He broke the chain of command, risking his head no less than in battle. He gave the command, "Forward!" Imagine that moment. Thousands of people exhale clouds of steam and take the first step up the slope. Up, toward the shield wall. Feet slipping on the frozen grass, heart pounding somewhere in the throat. You are walking to die because this pale youth in the front row decided for some reason that you have a chance. The center of the battle became a lonely thorn tree, a gnarled, stunted tree at the top of the hill that old men would talk about for a long time. It was around this tree that hell boiled over. The impact of the two armies was like a train wreck.
The sound of breaking spears, the cracking of shields, and the scream of thousands of throats merged into one continuous howl.
The Vikings, used to Anglo-Saxons running away or standing in passive defense, were stunned. These peasants didn't just stand, they pushed. Alfred led his men into the thick of it, right where the Viking banners flew most boldly. It wasn't a beautiful sword duel like they show in movies. It was a crush. A tight, sweaty, suffocating crush, where a man is killed not so much by a sword as by the weight of bodies piling on top. You don't see the enemy entirely. You only see twisted mouths, bloodshot eyes, and smell garlic, stale alcohol, and unwashed bodies. You strike blindly, just to create space to breathe. Ivar, if he was watching this, and his commanders were definitely there, saw something disturbing for the first time. The mechanism of terror malfunctioned. The Saxons stopped being afraid.
The myth of northern invincibility, which the Vikings had built so carefully by burning monasteries and slaughtering villages, crumbled right there by that thorn tree. It turned out that if you hit a Viking with an axe, he dies just like a Christian. He is not a demon. He is just a man of flesh and blood. The battle lasted for hours. The snow turned black with dirt and red with blood. And suddenly the Viking wall wavered. First one backed away, then another. Panic is a contagion, and it spreads instantly. Those who were used to being hunters suddenly realized they were the prey. They ran. The result of the day was shocking. The field was littered with the corpses of the Scandinavian elite. King Bagseg, dead. 5 jarls, dead. Thousands of rank-and-file warriors lay on foreign soil, fertilizing the roots of that very thorn tree with their bodies. It was a rout. A total, humiliating rout of the Great Army. But let's be cynics. Did the war end? No. The Vikings retreated, licked their wounds, and 2 weeks later were ready for battle again. Alfred won the battle, but not the war. In a strategic sense, Ashdown changed little on the map, but it changed everything in people's heads. The psychological turning point was colossal. For the first time in years of endless defeats, tribute, and humiliation, the Anglo-Saxons realized they can be beaten. The gods of the north are not omnipotent. This wild boar, Alfred, showed that intellect and fury can compensate for a lack of strength. However, the euphoria was short-lived. The reality of war is economics and logistics, not just heroism. Wessex was exhausted. People were running out. Silver was running out. And the longships kept coming and coming, spitting out new hordes of mercenaries hungry for their share of the loot. Ivar the Boneless, analyzing the reports of survivors, drew conclusions. The frontal assault in the south got bogged down in the sticky defense of this stubborn kingdom. Wessex turned out to be a nut hard enough to break teeth on, and Ivar didn't like breaking his teeth. He liked breaking enemies. If a door doesn't open with a kick, find a window, or undermine the foundation, or burn the house down with the tenants inside. His gaze shifted west, to where the Emerald Isle lay across the sea, torn by internal strife even bloodier than in England. Ireland. Ivar realized that war is an expensive pleasure. To destroy Alfred, resources are needed, a base is needed, a market is needed, and he decided to change tactics. Instead of banging his head against the shields of Wessex, he would create an empire that would strangle this island economically. While England buried its dead and prepared for a new spring of war, Ivar's sails turned west. He wasn't leaving as a defeated man. He was leaving as a businessman changing his investment strategy. And the location of his new business project was to be Dublin, a place where human life had a specific price in silver. Dublin in the 870s wasn't a city in our understanding. It was a festering wound on the body of Ireland that pulsed with gold and blood. If York was a fortress, Dublin became a market, the most terrifying supermarket of the Dark Ages, where living merchandise sat on the shelves. Ivar the Boneless didn't arrive there to rest. He arrived to build a new type of empire. Here he found the perfect partner, Olaf the White. Imagine this duo. Ivar, a tactical genius, a cripple with the eyes of a snake, and Olaf, a warrior king, the embodiment of brute Nordic strength. They weren't friends. Predators don't have friends. They form packs when the prey is too big for one. Their alliance was sealed not by blood oaths, but by pure distilled greed.
Together, they turned Dublin into a logistical center of terror. Forget the romantic image of the Viking as a free adventurer seeking glory. Face the truth. A Viking is a slave trader. The sagas shamefully stay silent about this, but archaeology doesn't lie. Shackles are found more often than swords. The economics of Ivar's war was simple and cynical, like a knife to the liver. A raid on a monastery brought gold once, but if you don't kill the monks, but chain them up and sell them to the Arab Caliphate or the markets of the Mediterranean, you get a profit that allows you to outfit 10 more ships. Humans became currency, hard currency that doesn't devalue. A strong man costs so many ounces of silver, a young woman, more. A child, an investment in the future. Do you hear that sound? It's not the clashing of swords, it's the clinking of chains. Thousands of people, Celts, Saxons, Picts, passed through the dirty docks of Dublin. They were stripped of their names, history, and future, turned into a faceless labor force.
Ivar understood the main thing. War is expensive.
To maintain an army of professional killers, you need huge amounts of money. And he created a conveyor belt. The Great Army in England obtained the raw materials, prisoners. Dublin processed these raw materials into Arab dirhams. It was the first transnational corporation of the North, built on bones. And what of Wessex? What was our wild boar Alfred doing while an empire of slaves was being born in the West? Alfred did what any proud king would consider an indelible disgrace. He paid. After the year of battles, Wessex was bled dry. Heroism is wonderful, but you can't feed soldiers with heroism. Alfred looked at his country. Burned fields, an empty treasury, graveyards overflowing with the best warriors. And he made a decision for which he could be called a coward. He made peace with the Vikings, paying them a ransom. Historians will call this Danegeld, gold of the Danes. It sounds almost noble.
In reality, it was a protection racket.
Imagine, a thug breaks into your house, beats your family, breaks the furniture, and you give him your wallet so he'll leave. Humiliating? Absolutely. But Alfred was not an epic hero. He was a pragmatist. He was buying the only resource that cannot be won in battle. He was buying time. Every ounce of silver handed over to the Vikings was an investment in survival. Alfred knew they would return. A treaty with a pagan is worth less than the parchment it's written on. The Vikings would take the gold, drink it away, buy new weapons, and come back for more. It is inevitable, like the tide. But while they counted the coins, Alfred got a respite. 5 years of silence. 5 years bought at the price of humiliating the taxpayers. Many in Wessex grumbled. "The king pays our enemies. He sponsors our killers," whispered the thanes in the corners. And they were right. Wessex gold flowed into the pockets of Ivar and Guthrum, making them stronger. But Alfred understood that the alternative was total annihilation. Better to be poor but alive than a rich corpse. While in the south, Alfred feverishly restored his strength. In the north, Ivar's ambitions reached the stratosphere. Dublin became too small for him. There was plenty of silver, thousands of slaves, but he needed something more than wealth. He needed a triumph that would write his name into eternity. He needed a legend. Ivar's gaze turned north, to the lands of the Britons. There, on a high volcanic rock, stood a fortress about which legends were composed. Alt Clut. The Scandinavians called it the Fortress of the Britons. We know it as Dumbarton, the capital of the Kingdom of Strathclyde. This rock was considered impregnable. It towered over the confluence of the rivers Clyde and Leven like a stone fist threatening the sky. For centuries, armies had shattered against its walls like waves against cliffs. To take Dumbarton meant doing the impossible.
For any other chieftain, it would have been madness. For Ivar, it was a challenge. He gathered a fleet, not just a raiding party, but an armada. Together with Olaf the White, they led their ships north. This was no longer a chase for slaves. This was a war of annihilation against an entire kingdom. Ivar intended to prove to the world that for his intellect, there were no walls that could not be destroyed. By the end of the year 870, when cold winds already heralded winter, black sails blocked the horizon at the foot of Dumbarton. The defenders of the fortress looked down from the height of their rock and probably laughed. What could these barbarians do against stone that had stood here since the creation of the world? They didn't know that below, among thousands of fierce faces, a cripple sat on a litter who had already calculated their doom without even drawing a sword. A siege began that would enter textbooks of military history as an example of absolute, cold, and ruthless patience. Ivar wasn't going to storm the sky. He was going to force the sky to fall to the earth. Before you is Dumbarton, two huge basalt cliffs sticking out of the water like dragon's teeth. Between them is a saddle where buildings, palaces, and warehouses are nestled. This isn't just a castle, it is a geological anomaly turned into a fort. The walls here are a mere formality. Nature itself said no to anyone trying to climb up. The king of the Britons, Artgal, looked down from his height and felt safe. For centuries, Picts, Scots, and Saxons had broken their spears here. Why should these northern savages be any more successful? But Artgal made the classic mistake of a civilized man. He judged the enemy by his clothes, not his eyes. He saw barbarians in skins. Ivar, however, looked at the rock not as a warrior seeking glory in a duel, but as an engineer looking for a point of structural failure. The siege of Dumbarton was a masterclass of military genius. Ivar understood. Storming a vertical wall under a hail of stones and arrows is for idiots. Dead heroes don't bring profit. He chose the tactics of a constrictor, slow, methodical strangulation. The Vikings surrounded the rock. The fleet blocked the exit to the sea. Troops on land cut off all paths, and the most terrible phase of war began. Waiting. 4 months. 120 days. Try to imagine that time. Below, in the Viking camp, smoke from fires, roasted meat, beer, and laughter. They are in no hurry. They are simply living, enjoying the view. But up above, in the stone trap, time flows quite differently. Food supplies are melting away, but hunger is half the trouble. A human can live without food for weeks. The real horror came when the well ran dry. Chronicles tell us that the well dried up miraculously. But you and I know that Ivar didn't have a magic wand. He had scouts and diggers. Most likely, the Vikings found the vein feeding the spring and diverted the water, or simply blocked access to it. Ivar turned off the tap. Imagine you are up there. Your tongue is swollen and doesn't fit in your mouth. Children are crying, but they have no tears. The body conserves moisture. You lick damp moss on the stones. You drink your own urine. And down below, just 100 meters away, splashes the River Clyde. Millions of liters of fresh water. It is so close, you can hear its sound. But between you and life stands an army that knows no pity. This is torture, compared to which the blood eagle seems like an act of mercy. The psychological pressure was monstrous. Ivar didn't attack. He just waited for biology to do all the work for him. He turned an impregnable fortress into a prison, and then into a crypt. King Artgal surrendered not because he lost a battle. He surrendered because watching people die of thirst is scarier than dying oneself. The capitulation of Dumbarton became the pinnacle of Ivar's career. What the residents of Dublin saw when the fleet returned home boggled the mind. 200 ships. Think about that number. 200 longships sailing in line astern. It wasn't a flotilla, it was a floating city. And every ship was overloaded. They carried not only gold, church vessels, and the precious stones of the Strathclyde crown, they carried people. A huge number of slaves, Angles, Britons, Picts, an entire demographic cross-section of northern Britain. Kings, noble ladies, craftsmen, warriors, now all of them were just merchandise, cargo. Ivar didn't just defeat a kingdom, he liquidated it. He gutted Strathclyde like a fisherman guts a cod, leaving an empty shell. At that moment, standing on the docks of Dublin in 871, Ivar the Boneless was perhaps the most powerful man in the British Isles. He broke the back of Northumbria. He destroyed East Anglia. He wiped the might of the Britons off the face of the earth. Kings trembled at the sound of his name. It seemed he had challenged God himself and won. He proved that chaos is stronger than order, that cruel intellect is more important than ancient traditions. But fate, like Ivar, had a peculiar sense of humor. The top of the mountain is the loneliest and most dangerous place. There is nowhere else to go, only down. The triumph in Dublin became the final chord in the symphony of destruction that Ivar played. He achieved the status of a demigod. His people worshipped him. Enemies considered him an immortal demon. But the biology that helped him take Dumbarton now turned against him. The man who brought kingdoms to their knees could not negotiate with his own body. The suddenness of what happened next shook the Viking world more than any defeat on the battlefield. The great strategist, the architect of nightmares, the man who redrew the map of Britain, suddenly disappeared from the stage. And this void formed in the place of a titan threatened to swallow everything he had created. Because an empire built on fear of one man cannot survive his death. Night was falling on Dublin, and in the shadows of the torches, new figures were already stirring. Those who waited in the shadow of Ivar's glory. Those who were ready to tear throats out for his legacy. The power vacuum began to suck in ambition, betrayal, and new rivers of blood. The era of Ragnar's great sons was ending, but the era of peace was still infinitely far away. And so, in the year 873, silence falls on Dublin. The loudest silence in the history of the Dark Ages. The man who seemed immortal, who survived hundreds of battles, did not perish by the sword. He didn't fall from the wall of Dumbarton. He simply died. The Irish annals dryly state, Ivar, king of all the Norsemen of Ireland and Britain, ended his life. Christian chroniclers, not hiding their gloating, add details. A sudden and hideous death. They wanted to believe it was God's punishment, that the tyrant's insides rotted alive, eaten away by divine wrath. Modern medicine would most likely give a boring diagnosis, heart failure or complications from his congenital bone disease. But for people of that time, it was a shock. Imagine that moment. The body that struck terror into half of Europe is now just a piece of meat that needs to be burned or buried. Ivar's departure was a tectonic shift. The great Heathen Army lost its brain. As if a giant octopus had its head chopped off, but the tentacles continued to live their own life, convulsively contracting, but now without a single purpose. The era of the Sons of Ragnar, an era of epic villains and grand strategies, was over. The time of infighting began. A power vacuum is a terrible thing. It does not tolerate emptiness. Jackals came to replace the dead lion. The army split. Halfdan, Ivar's brother, took some of the people north to plow the land and build farms. They were tired of war. They wanted to become landowners. But the other part, the greediest, the hungriest, remained. And they needed a leader. Out of the shadows stepped a man named Guthrum. Remember that name. If Ivar was an aristocrat of destruction, a prince of the blood whom men followed by right of birth, then Guthrum was a self-made man of the Viking Age. He had no great lineage. He had no prophetic charisma. He had only an army and an absolute, crystal-clear lack of conscience. Guthrum brought with him the so-called Great Summer Army. Fresh meat. Thousands of young adventurers from Scandinavia who were late for the division of Ivar's pie and now craved to grab their piece. Guthrum was the ideal leader for this gang. He was a pragmatist to the bone, an opportunist who changed the rules of the game right during the game. To Alfred, a change of leader among the enemies seemed like a chance. He was used to dealing with kings. Even pagans had their concepts of honor. Oaths, exchange of hostages, sacred rings, all this worked as a diplomatic tool. Alfred thought he could make a deal with Guthrum. This was his fatal mistake. Alfred met Guthrum as etiquette taught. They made peace. The Saxons paid another ransom. Guthrum swore on a sacred bracelet dedicated to Thor, the highest oath for a Viking, the violation of which is punishable by eternal damnation, that he would leave Wessex. For reliability, Alfred made him swear on the relics of Christian saints, too. Double insurance. What did Guthrum do? He took the gold. He looked at the sacred bracelet, looked at the relics, and that same night he slaughtered the Saxon guard, jumped on horses, which in itself was an innovation. Vikings began using cavalry for fast strikes, and raced off to capture Exeter. For Alfred, this was a punch to the gut. He faced a new type of enemy. Guthrum didn't care about gods, neither his own nor others. He didn't care about reputation. He was only interested in efficiency. If a lie brings victory, then the lie is sacred. If breaking an oath saves the army, then the oath was a mistake. The war turned into a rat race. Alfred chased Guthrum all over the south of England. It was exhausting. It was maddening. The King of Wessex tried to play chess, while his opponent simply swept the pieces off the board and hit him over the head with the board. By the end of the year 877, the situation had reached a stalemate. Guthrum retreated to Gloucester, in Mercian territory, to winter. Alfred disbanded his militia, the Fyrd. Peasants needed to return home, to their families and fields. War at that time was a seasonal event. You don't fight in winter. In winter, roads turn to slush, mud becomes impassable, and the cold kills faster than a sword. There was an unspoken non-aggression pact with nature. Everyone went to celebrate Christmas. Alfred, tired but confident that he was safe until spring, went to his royal estate in Chippenham. He planned to spend Twelfth Night in warmth, with wine and prayers, celebrating the birth of the Savior. He didn't know that in Gloucester, just a few days' journey away, Guthrum was looking at the snow-covered hills and seeing not an obstacle, but an opportunity. The Viking reasoned simply, if the enemy thinks one cannot attack in winter, then winter is exactly when one must attack. Guthrum decided to commit a sacrilege that wouldn't have occurred even to Ivar. He decided to turn the brightest Christian holiday into a bloodbath. While Alfred listened to Christmas hymns, steel was already being sharpened, and horses were champing at the bit. A cold wind carried the scent of catastrophe from the north, but no one felt it in the warm hall of Chippenham. The carelessness of the civilized world in the face of barbarian pragmatism was about to cost the king too dearly. It was the night when God seemed to finally turn away from the English.
January 6th, 878. 12th night of Christmas, a sacred time. In the royal estate of Chippenham, the air was heavy with the smell of roasted meat, spruce branches, and cheap wine. The guards were nodding off. Thanes were unfastening their belts, belching and praising Christ. They thought war was sleeping until spring. They believed in rules. But Guthrum had his own calendar. Hell opened up. Not from the sky, but from the fortress gates, which suddenly burst inward under the blows of battering rams. Guthrum didn't just violate the winter truce. He committed sacrilege by attacking at the height of a holy holiday. It was the masterstroke of a sociopath. While the Saxons raised their goblets, the Vikings raised their axes. The festive feast turned into a slaughter in minutes. Wine mixed with blood on the straw floor. The screams of the dying drowned out the Christmas hymns. The Kingdom of Wessex, the last free state in Britain, ceased to exist in one night. This is not hyperbole. It is a fact. The structure of power crumbled like a house of cards. Aristocrats, those brave thanes who swore allegiance, either died or, worse, fled across the sea to France. Many rushed to bend the knee before the new master, hoping to save at least their lives. But the main prize slipped out of Guthrum's hands.
In the chaos of the massacre, amidst the smoke and panic, a small group of riders broke through the back gates. Alfred fled. A king without a crown, a commander without an army, a ruler without land. He raced into the night, hearing his past burn behind him. Where to run when the whole country is occupied by the enemy? Alfred steered his horse to where no normal person would survive. Into the marshes of Somerset. To Athelney. Imagine this place. It isn't the Shire from Tolkien's tales. In the winter of 878, it was an icy hell. Boundless swamps, black, stagnant water, thickets of alder and willow hidden by fog. You couldn't walk here, only crawl or float on flat-bottomed boats. Dampness, fever, and hunger reigned here. And it was here, on a tiny, dry island amidst the quagmire, that the last king of England took shelter. It was the lowest point of the fall. Absolute rock bottom.
Just yesterday he slept on silks, and today he shivered under a holy cloak, listening to the squelching water, wondering if a Viking patrol was coming. It is to this period that the famous legend of the burnt cakes belongs. You've surely heard this yarn. The king, incognito, asked for a night's lodging in a peasant woman's hut, or a swineherd's wife. The woman told him to watch the bread in the oven while she went out. Alfred, immersed in gloomy thoughts, forgot about the food, and the cakes burned. The returning hostess scolded him like a complete idiot, not knowing who was before her. Why has this story survived for 1,000 years? Not because it's a culinary anecdote, it is the perfect metaphor for his mental state. Put yourself in his place. You have lost everything. Your family is in danger, your people are enslaved, your faith is mocked.
You sit by a stranger's fire, staring at the coals, and one question spins in your head.
How to defeat the invincible? What the hell kind of bread? Alfred at that moment was incapable of performing the simplest job because his mind was solving an equation with 1,000 unknowns. He was thinking about the survival of a nation, not about breakfast. But it was in this mud, among the reeds and despair, that a transformation occurred. The old Alfred, the bookworm and pious monarch, died in the swamps of Athelney. Someone else was born. He realized, you can't play by the rules anymore. Chivalry is dead. Honor is a luxury for winners. To defeat the Vikings, you have to become a Viking. Or even something more. You have to become a ghost. Alfred started a guerrilla war. Instead of gathering large detachments that are easy to spot and defeat, he created a network of small groups. They acted like wasps, sting and vanish.
Attack a supply train, cut the sentries' throats, burn supplies and dissolve into the fog of the swamps that only the locals knew. He turned the landscape into his weapon. The marshes, which seemed like a prison, became a fortress. Every day he and his men made sorties. They didn't seek glory in open battle. They engaged in terror. They instilled fear in the invaders. Vikings, used to being hunters, suddenly felt like prey. They went out of the camp to take a leak and found an arrow in their throat. They sent foragers for grain, and they didn't come back, or came back in pieces. Alfred learned to be ruthless. He stole food from those who collaborated with the enemy. He killed without warning. It was dirty, bloody work, not worthy of troubadours' songs. But it worked. Rumors crept through the villages. The king is alive. He hasn't abandoned us. He is fighting. Hope is a dangerous thing. It is more contagious than the plague.
In occupied Wessex, people began to raise their heads. Peasants hid grain from Guthrum's tax collectors. Blacksmiths secretly forged spearheads. Remnants of the Fyrd gathered in the forests. Alfred, in the marshes of Athelney, was engaged not just in survival. He was engaged in the marketing of resistance. He sent out messengers with one message: "Get ready, the hour is near." He used his knowledge of the terrain and his knowledge of psychology. Guthrum sat in the comfort of captured palaces, getting fat and relaxed, thinking victory was already in his pocket. He thought the king had rotted in the swamp, but the spring of 878 brought not only warmth, it brought a feeling the Vikings had long forgotten: uncertainty. The ground under their feet began to burn. Every shadow in the forest could hide death. By May, the marshes began to dry out. The time for defense was over.
Alfred, hardened by months of hardship, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much darkness, made a decision. It was time to put everything on the line. Either he would win back his kingdom with one blow, or he would die trying. No more half measures, no gold for peace, only steel. He appointed a gathering place, not in the capital, not in a fortress, at a lonely stone on the border of 3 shires, Egbert's Stone. It was the point of no return, the signal awaited by all who had not yet lost faith. From the forests, from the swamps, from distant farms, people began to come out. They didn't go by coercion. They went because the ghost had returned to demand payment. The dead came out of their graves to give one last battle to the living. May 878. The fields by Egbert's Stone trembled not from the wind, but from the stamping of thousands of feet. It was like a resurrection. From the dense forests of Wiltshire, from the hidden paths of Hampshire, from the surviving villages of Somerset, people streamed in. It wasn't a regular army in shining armor. These were the ghosts the Vikings whispered about. Men with hollow cheeks, in rusty mail stripped from the corpses of their fathers, with axes on which the blood of winter skirmishes had not yet dried. Alfred stood by the ancient stone and looked at this sea of people. The chronicle says, "They met him as if raised from the dead and were filled with great joy." But let's be honest, this wasn't the joy of a festival. It was the hysterical joy of people sentenced to death who were suddenly given weapons and a chance to take the executioner with them. They had no supply trains, no escape plan. It was a one-way ticket. All in. The king staked everything: his life, his crown, and the very existence of the English nation. The army moved on Edington. Guthrum, entrenched on the high ground, probably didn't believe his eyes. He thought Wessex was a corpse that just needed to be butchered.
And suddenly, the corpse stood up and came for him. The Viking, used to being the predator, suddenly discovered that the forest he considered his hunting ground had spawned an army of avengers. But Guthrum was no coward. He was a professional. He brought out his veterans, the Old Guard, who had marched with him from Denmark to Repton, and formed them into a shield wall on the crest of the hill. The Battle of Edington was not elegant fencing. Forget everything you've seen in Hollywood movies where heroes jump and spin. The reality of the early Middle Ages is a crush. It's rugby, where instead of a ball, it's your life, and the players are armed with axes. Two shield walls collided with a sound as if the earth itself had cracked. Wood crashed into wood, iron ground against iron. The first row is a death squad. You are pressed into the enemy's shield by the weight of hundreds of bodies pushing from behind. You smell the enemy's rotten teeth, see the pores on his face, feel his spit spray into your eyes when he screams with rage. In such a meat grinder, tactics cease to matter. Only physics and psychology remain. Who will crush whom? Who blinks first? Usually, such clashes didn't last long. The human psyche cannot withstand the tension when death stands 4 inches from your face. One side breaks, and the slaughter of those running away begins. But at Edington, something anomalous happened. The battle lasted for hours. The sun rose to its zenith, heating the chainmail to the state of hot frying pans. People fell from dehydration, slipping on guts and mud, but the line did not crumble. The Saxons, these farmers whom the Vikings despised, stood to the death. Why? Because they had nowhere to run. Behind their backs were burned houses and children sold into slavery. This wasn't a war for territory. It was a war for the right to breathe. Alfred was there, in the first row or right behind it, not on a hill with a spyglass, but in the thick of events, where the air was thick with the metallic taste of blood. He held the line by his example. He showed that the frail bookworm was dead. The Wolf King remained, clamped onto the enemy's throat, and the Vikings wavered. At first it was barely noticeable. The pressure of the shields weakened slightly. A little more fear appeared in the eyes of the berserkers. Guthrum, an experienced commander, realized something had changed. He fought for loot, for lands, for glory. But these madmen opposite fought with the fury of the doomed. The economics of war malfunctioned. The price of victory became too high even for Vikings. The Northerners' shield wall burst. It was a sound like a giant exhaling. Chaos. Panic. Those who a second ago were invincible warriors turned into a fleeing crowd. The Saxons rushed in pursuit. The chronicler Asser writes with ruthless directness. He pursued them to the fortress, hacking them down in flight. The earth drank too much that day. The remnants of Guthrum's army locked themselves in a fortification, probably an old Iron Age fort or Chippenham itself. Alfred didn't storm it. He remembered Ivar's lessons at Dumbarton. He simply surrounded the fortress and waited. 14 days, 2 weeks of siege. Guthrum sat behind the walls and listened to the stomachs of his best warriors rumble. They ate all the supplies. They ate the horses. They started looking at leather belts and wondering if they could be boiled. Viking pride shattered against banal physiology. Cold, hunger, and fear. These are the 3 horsemen that broke the spirit of the great army. It was the end. But not the end everyone expected. By the logic of that time, Alfred should have entered the fortress and slaughtered everyone. Piled a pyramid of heads, as Ivar would have done. Avenged Chippenham, Reading, all the humiliations. The crowd demanded blood. But Alfred wasn't just an avenger. He was an architect. He understood that a dead Guthrum is just a corpse, and a new leader from across the sea would take his place. But a living, broken Guthrum, who owed his life, could become something more useful. A tool. Guthrum came out of the gates, thin, dirty, humiliated. He surrendered his weapons, he gave hostages, the most noble jarls, and he agreed to a condition that sounded absurd to a pagan, like a victor's joke. Alfred demanded not gold, not lands. He demanded Guthrum's soul. "You will accept my faith," the king said. "You will become a Christian." To a Viking, this might have seemed like a mere formality. Dunk in the water, mumble some words, get a gift, a white shirt, and perhaps gold from the Godfather. Vikings often got baptized for trade or gifts, and then continued praying to Thor. But Alfred wasn't naive. He wasn't preparing a religious rite. He was preparing the greatest political transformation of the century. The victory at Edington was a miracle, but what Alfred planned to do with the defeated enemy was far more complex than just swinging an axe. He was going to reforge a wild beast into a watchdog that would guard the borders of his new world. The swords were dulled, and the time had come for weapons far sharper and more ruthless: bureaucracy and diplomacy. The war was moving from a phase of destruction to a phase of construction, and the foundation of this construction had to be mixed with holy water and cold calculation. The baptism ceremony at Wedmore that followed the battle was the greatest spectacle of the era. Imagine the scene. Guthrum, the scourge of God, murderer and robber, stands in the white robes of a neophyte. Around him are bishops, the smell of incense and solemn chants. Alfred, the man who just 2 weeks ago dreamed of putting Guthrum's head on a pike, now stands beside him as his godfather. Don't be deceived by the pious picture from church books. This wasn't a spiritual epiphany. Guthrum didn't see the light of truth. He saw the only way to keep his head on his shoulders. Alfred, meanwhile, was performing an act of political magic. By accepting baptism, Guthrum ceased to be an external enemy, a pagan monster with whom one cannot negotiate. He became part of the system. He received a new name, Athelstan. He became a vassal. It was a brilliant move. Alfred didn't just defeat the enemy, he hacked him. He integrated the virus into his operating system, making it an antivirus. Guthrum received lands in East Anglia, but now he was obliged to defend them according to the laws of the Christian world. The wolf put on a collar, and the leash was in the hands of the King of Wessex. But Alfred was a realist. He knew that oaths, even those sealed with holy water, have an expiration date. Guthrum was old and broken, but across the sea, in Scandinavia, new generations of sea kings were growing up, hungry for glory and silver. The peace bought at Wedmore was just a respite, and Alfred decided to spend this time not on feasts, but on building a survival machine. He understood the main vulnerability of his kingdom. The Anglo-Saxons were excellent warriors in an open field, but they lived in open villages. The Vikings were mobile. They appeared out of nowhere, looted, and vanished before the slow-moving militia could gather. Alfred decided to change the geography of war. If you can't catch a Viking, you have to make it so he has nowhere to run and nothing to loot. Thus, the burr system was born. It was the most massive infrastructure revolution in the history of Britain since the Romans. Alfred turned Wessex into one giant fortress. His engineers mapped out the kingdom with mathematical precision. The idea was simple and elegant. No village, no farm should be further than 20 miles from a fortified refuge. 20 miles. That's 1 day's march on foot. This meant that in case of an alarm, any peasant could make it to safety behind walls before sunset. The whole country turned into a construction site. Thousands of people who used to hold a plow now picked up shovels and pickaxes. They dug ditches, erected palisades, restored old Roman walls in Winchester and Exeter, and built new earthen ramparts in Oxford and Wallingford. The air filled with dust and the sound of axes. But building walls is half the battle. Someone has to defend them. And here Alfred showed himself not as a warrior, but as a ruthless bureaucrat. He created a document that historians would call the Burgle Heidage. It was a boring accounting ledger that saved the nation. There were no heroic sagas in this document. There were numbers.
Alfred calculated the length of the walls of each fortress and calculated how many people were needed to defend them.
The formula was rigid. 4 men for every 5.5 yards of wall. No more, no less. He rewrote the social contract. Land was no longer given for free. Own land? Pay a tax in people. Every hide of land, a measure of area, was obliged to provide and support one fighter. It was the total militarization of society. Alfred created a standing army and a network of garrisons maintained by taxpayers. Did people like it? Oh, they hated it. Thanes grumbled that the king was strangling them with levies. Peasants groaned from labor conscription. Alfred became a tyrant for their own good. He took away their freedom to be idle, to gift them the right to live. Imagine the disappointment of the Vikings who sailed to Wessex a couple of years later. Before, they saw rich, defenseless monasteries standing like ripe apples, ready to fall into their hands.
Now there were walls before them, everywhere. Wherever they poked, they were met by a palisade, a ditch, and a garrison that didn't sleep. The war had changed. A raid is fun. Land, kill, steal, sail away. A siege is boring, dangerous, and expensive. Sitting for months in the mud under walls, dying of dysentery while the defenders laugh at you from above. Vikings were pragmatists. They looked for easy prey. Alfred made the prey difficult. He stripped war of its profitability. Irony of fate, wild pagans sought gold, but found the only thing they feared more than death: bureaucracy. Alfred's systemic approach ground down Ivar's chaos. The king realized that the winner isn't the one who hits harder with an axe, but the one with better logistics. The fortified towns, burhs, became not just military bases, they turned into centers of trade. Behind safe walls, markets flourished. Craftsmen, tired of trembling with fear in the forests, flocked to the cities. Where there used to be only soldiers, mints appeared.
Alfred began minting new coins, restoring the economy. Silver that used to go to pay off Vikings now worked inside the country. The warrior king turned into an architect king. He invited scholars, translated books from Latin into English, and forced his judges to learn to read under threat of dismissal. He built a nation out of bricks, laws, and words. He understood that it's not enough to win back land from the enemy. You need to populate it with meaning. Otherwise, it will remain a wasteland. But time is the cruelest enemy, one that cannot be defeated by a shield wall or the high walls of burhs. The disease that tormented Alfred all his life was undermining his strength. By the end of the 9th century, the great king felt his watch was coming to an end. He looked at his walls, at his laws, at his books, and asked himself one question: will all this stand when he is gone?
The building was built, but the foundation was still fresh.
Wessex survived, but England had not yet been born. The north and east still spoke Danish. Jarls ruled there, and their swords had not rusted. Alfred bought time, but the battle for the future of the island was just beginning. And it was no longer up to him to lead this battle. Dying, Alfred knew he was leaving his children not just a crown, but a sword that could not be sheathed. He left them the blueprints of an empire and instructions for survival in a world where weakness is a deadly sin. A new generation was preparing to take the stage. Children who grew up to the sound of alarm horns, who knew no peace, but knew how to win. And among them was one who would outshine many male kings. October 26th, 899. Winchester plunged into mourning, but along with the wailing of mourners, a heavy, sticky fear hung in the air. Alfred died.
The architect who held the sky from falling to the earth was gone. He was only in his early 50s, but war aged kings faster than time. He died knowing the terrible truth. The work was not finished. The walls were built, the laws written, but half the island still spoke Danish and prayed to Thor. In the feasting halls of York and East Anglia, Vikings likely raised horns of ale. They had been waiting for this moment for decades. They thought Wessex was a one-man show, that with the death of the charismatic leader, this whole complex system of burghs, taxes, and militia would collapse like a house of cards. They expected civil war, disputes over inheritance, weakness. They were wrong. Fatally, catastrophically wrong. Alfred left behind not just a kingdom, he left behind a team. And perhaps for the first time in history, the best man on this team turned out to be a woman. Meet Alfred's children. Edward, nicknamed the Elder, took the throne of Wessex. He was a competent, tough, and methodical military man. But the real surprise for the Vikings was his sister, Ethelfled. History knows her as the Lady of the Mercians. Forget tales of princesses embroidering by the window and waiting for rescue. Ethelfled grew up in an era when the horizon burned every spring. She remembered fleeing into the swamps. She saw her father build a state out of mud and blood. She was married off to the ruler of Mercia, Ethelred, a political alliance designed to unite the last two English kingdoms. But when her husband fell ill and faded, Ethelfled didn't go to a monastery. She took power into her own hands. It was an unprecedented case. In a world where respect was measured by the force of a sword blow, where a woman was either a trophy or a mother, Anglo-Saxon warriors, stern, bearded killers, bowed their heads before Alfred's daughter. Why? Because she was a genius of war. If Alfred was the shield of England, his children became the sword. They changed strategy. The era of survival was over. The era of Reconquista began. Edward and Ethelfled acted like two hammers striking one anvil. They didn't wait for raids. They went to the Vikings themselves. But they didn't go like Ivar, with fury and fire. They went with shovels. Alfred's children used their father's invention, burrs, as an offensive weapon. Imagine a boa constrictor slowly strangling its prey. Edward and Ethelfled would capture a piece of Viking territory, but instead of looting it, they immediately built a fortress there, a garrison, walls, patrols. They secured the land for themselves. The border of the Danelaw, the area of Danish law, slowly but inexorably crept north and east. It was a war of logistics. The Vikings would go out into the field wanting a fair fight, but discover that their lands were already cut off by a chain of forts. Ethelfled personally led campaigns. Chronicles say she captured Derby, one of the 5 boroughs of the Danelaw. Imagine the shock of a Viking Jarl when his gates are breached by an army commanded by a woman. It broke their worldview. It humiliated them. Surrendering to a king is honorable. Surrendering to a spinster is a disgrace that cannot be washed away even with blood. But Ethelfled paid no attention to gender stereotypes. She was a pragmatist. She negotiated, made alliances, and when necessary, sent assault squads to the walls. In 907, she fortified Chester, turning it into an impregnable bastion in the northwest, cutting off Viking access from Ireland. She strangled their trade, their communications,
their hope. The Vikings began to understand that they were facing something terrible. Before, they fought people. Now, they were fighting a system. A system doesn't get tired. It doesn't feel fear. It slowly chews up cities and spits them out already English. By the year 910, the old Viking world was bursting at the seams. York was agitated.
East Anglia was under pressure. The descendants of Ragnar, used to being masters of life, suddenly felt like cornered beasts. And, like any cornered beast, they decided to snap back. For the last time. The Scandinavians understood. If they didn't stop this steamroller now, their history on the island would end. They needed a big victory. A decisive battle that would destroy the army of Wessex and Mercia, beheading the Hydra raised by Alfred. They gathered their forces. The Jarls of the North, the Kings of Dublin, mercenaries hungry for gold. Everyone who could hold a weapon united. This was the old guard of the Vikings. Proud, cruel warriors who remembered Ivar's precepts. They believed in the power of rage. They believed that Odin would help them crush this bureaucratic machine of the Christians. They moved deep into Mercia, looting and burning everything in their path, trying to provoke Edward and Ethelfled into a rash step. They wanted to lure them into an open field where the fury of berserkers could smash the Saxon formation. But they forgot who they were dealing with. Alfred's children were not impulsive heroes of sagas. They were cold professionals. Edward and Ethelfled, who was already dying by that time, but her spirit still led the army, set a trap. They allowed the Vikings to go deep, allowed them to feel the taste of impunity, and then slammed the trap shut. The stage was set for the final act of this bloody drama. A battle that was to decide the fate of Britain for centuries to come was brewing at a place called Tettenhall. The air was electrified with anticipation. Two civilizations, two ways of life, two truths met face to face again. But this time, the Anglo-Saxons were not victims. They were executioners, coming to carry out history's sentence. The Vikings sharpened their axes, praying for Valhalla. The Saxons checked their shield straps, praying for victory.
Both sides understood. Few would survive tomorrow. The old guard of the North prepared to give their last fight, unsuspecting that their time had already run out. Not on the battlefield, but the moment the first English mason laid the first stone in the foundation of the first burh. The ghosts of Ivar and Alfred invisibly hovered over the hills, awaiting the resolution of their eternal dispute. Who will win? Insane courage or iron order? Steel was to give the answer. August 5th, 910. Remember this date. In history textbooks, it often gets lost behind louder events like Hastings. But it was on this hot summer day, in the fields of Staffordshire, that the old Viking world choked on its own blood. The Northern Army was returning home. They were pleased. Their longships and wagons were bursting with looted goods. They had raided through the lands of Mercia, burned the harvest, taken slaves, and now, lazy and full, were moving toward their strongholds, confident in their impunity. They thought King Edward was somewhere far away in the south, gathering a fleet. It was a classic mistake, underestimating an enemy you are used to considering a victim. But the trap snapped shut at Tettenhall. Suddenly, the horizon was no longer blocked by dust from their own horses' hooves. New dust appeared. With a dense, rhythmic rumble, the combined armies of Wessex and Mercia didn't just catch up with the Vikings, they intercepted them. The path to retreat was cut off. The Northerners found themselves squeezed between the forest and a shield wall that looked far more disciplined than those Ivar broke 40 years ago. The Battle of Tettenhall wasn't a battle in the usual sense. It was an execution. The Saxons no longer trembled. Methodically, coolly, like butchers at a slaughterhouse, they set to work.
Decades of Alfred's reforms, Years of building burhs, drilling and taxes, all of this focused on one point. The Anglo-Saxon war machine, greased by bureaucracy and hatred, worked at full capacity. Chronicles describe this day sparingly, but behind the dry lines lies the scale of the catastrophe for the Scandinavian world. Many thousands were killed. But it's not about the quantity, it's about the quality. On that day, in the mud of Tetton Hall, the entire Viking elite of Britain fell. 3 kings, Halfdan, Eowils, and Ivar, a namesake of our old acquaintance, a cruel irony of fate, lay among the corpses of their retainers. Jarls, commanders, veterans who remembered the taste of the first victories, all of them were slaughtered. The old guard, who considered this island their hunting ground, disappeared in one day. When the sun set over the battlefield, it was clear. The war was over. Of course, skirmishes would continue for a long time. There would be new raids, new kings. But the strategic backbone of the Vikings was broken. The initiative passed forever to the English. The predator turned into prey, and the former victim grew such fangs that it became more dangerous than any wolf. Look at this field. Mountains of bodies over which ravens are already circling. Broken shields with dragons trampled into the English clay. This is not just a graveyard. This is a construction site. It was here, on this bloody foundation, that England was born. Not in the prayers of monks, not in the silence of scriptoriums, not in wise laws. England was born the moment civilized man realized, to defeat a barbarian, you must become more effective in the art of killing than the barbarian himself. Ivar the Boneless and Alfred the Great, 2 titans, 2 poles, 2 ghosts. They have both been dead for a long time, but if you listen closely, their laughter still rings over the island. Who won this epic dispute? On one hand, Alfred won. His dynasty would unite the island. His language would become the language of Shakespeare and Newton. His faith would become the state religion. His grandson, Athelstan, would become the first true King of England. The system held. Chaos retreated. Order, bought at the price of total militarization and taxes, triumphed. But look closer. Did Ivar really lose? The Vikings didn't disappear. They dissolved. They became part of us. The words we use, window, knife, take, them, are Viking words. The names of towns ending in by and thorpe are monuments to their expansion. The English nation itself is a hybrid, a mixture of Saxon resilience and Scandinavian audacity. Ivar forced the Anglo-Saxons to change. Without Ivar, there would have been no Alfred the Great. There would be no fleet, no burhs, no united England. The Vikings were that cruel teacher who hits with a stick until the student learns to hit back. Ivar wanted to destroy the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, but instead, he forged them into a single empire. He came to destroy civilization, but forced it to reinvent itself. Tougher, meaner, more viable. This is the main lesson of those dark years. Comfort breeds weakness. Only an existential threat standing on the threshold with an axe in hand can force a society to mobilize and do the impossible. We leave 10th century Britain transformed. It is no longer a fragmented land of frightened farmers. It is a fortress state. An island that has learned the lesson, peace is just a break between wars. And to make that break last longer, you must be ready to tear out the throat of anyone who encroaches on your shore. The ghosts of Ivar and Alfred can finally rest. They did their job. They created a nation that would, in the future,
build the largest empire in human history. A nation of merchants and warriors, poets and pirates. A nation in whose veins flows the blood of both sides, those who defended the walls and those who stormed them. History closes this chapter, but leaves open the main question. Look at the price that had to be paid. Generations raised in fear. A culture steeped in paranoia and militarism. Freedom exchanged for the security of stone walls. And now, looking at the birth of this great state from dirt, ash, and betrayal, ask yourself, is the greatness of the state worth turning into a monster capable of devouring its own enemies? Or would true victory have been to remain human, even at the cost of defeat?